Hey everyone, welcome to the program, WRSA Radio. I am your host, Grenadier One. As always, I hope you're having a good week, and I am doing well. It's been a good week for me, and I've gotten a couple things accomplished that I believe will serve us well in the near term future. Concerned American and I are working on something that is gonna be cool, and well, I hope it's cool. So stay tuned here to listen for details on that. We've got one more little detail that we've got to nail down before we can announce it, and we should have that taken care of this week or maybe next week. So probably next week on the show I'll be able to tell you what I'm talking about. So anyway, let's get into the meat and potatoes for this week. I think you all have probably seen shortages happening in your local supply chain. We can kind of sum it up that way. We know it's happening with food and paper items, I guess, but I'm really speaking more of on the consumer goods, the hard goods side. I think the two areas are related, but I don't know exactly how. But this whole thing is a very complex problem that I want to talk about today. So I've been doing some research on this situation with global shipping and this buildup of container ships in our ports and harbors, and I watched a lot of videos and read a number of articles on this, and one thing that's kind of jumped out at me is that no one actually seems to have any idea what is actually causing this. Everyone is pointing to different areas and different causes of the problem, but no one seems to really be pinpointing consistently to what the issue or the issues are. It could be more than one thing, but basically it depends on who you watch or read or you're listening to as to what causes and reasons you'll get, for this happening. And that, at least to me, says that something is going on that we need to be looking into. And first thing to say is, I'm not an expert on global shipping. I do have a colleague at work. We do shipping globally, so we have a guy at work that is actually in my organization, and he is what I would call a subject matter expert. But he's kind of in the same boat. He's had multiple agents and sources that he's talked to, and no one seems to really be able to point to the same thing as being the cause. And he's just kind of chalking it up to a combination of things, but he basically shrugged his shoulders at it and said, we can't do anything except just expect these delays to be happening. Now, that's not really answering the question, I know, but, honestly, it's not a good enough answer for me either. So that was kind of what led me down the road on this thing. It began with me asking questions of him about what was causing delays with getting some of the communication devices that we utilize. Why were our suppliers telling us, it was going to take months for some of this stuff to arrive? Now, some of it was the chip shortages and things that, that further up the supply chain problem, that the devices, and we're not even getting manufactured in China or Taiwan because they were having problems. But, some of it was, it was just going to take so long for them to arrive, to be shipped. So, I thought about this and I looked into it, and I'm not getting a solid feeling about it. It's not making sense. Go back to when we discussed the ammo shortage. I did an entire episode on that and spoke about it a couple times. I didn't get the gut feeling that something nefarious was going on there because it made sense. The information we were getting was lining up and what we logically could expect to see, and it made sense what they were talking about, and this does not. Yes, that's my co-host, Trixie Cat. I'm not suggesting, at least on its face, that this is something like a plot by the government. It may be, it may not be. That's something we have to gather more evidence for, at this point, and I will explain that shortly. I'll get back to those government aspects of this later, but just to mention that in my research on this, one of the big things that stood out was that global shipping was deregulated back in the late 80s, and that began this massive surge during the 90s in conjunction with the U.S. government and the corporations selling us out to China. Just this massive surge in the amount of shipping and the size of container ships. They grew just exponentially. It was like for decades everything was pretty flat and pretty standard, and then in the 90s it started just exploding and the ships started growing, and now they're massive. These container ships can hold 9,000 containers that are 40 foot long and 18,000 containers that are 20 foot long. So they're huge now. Some of them are. But all of that was because of the government, the U.S. government, deregulated how they handled shipping. So at least on the surface, it's not these government relations and rules that are really causing the problem. And now, it may be contributing to it, but no one I've heard is necessarily saying that. In fact, some of the sources seem to be trying to use this to sell their narrative that the government needs to get back into more heavily regulating shipping. So I don't see that side of it at least being a major part of the problem here. Now, I could be wrong, but we'll look at that. But when we break down the whole process of shipping manufactured goods kind of into phases, we're looking at a major backlog in the middle of the process, which is very strange. When a company gets a product from overseas and it ships it into the country, it's coming on this big massive container ship, and the container arrives in port, and then there are several phases after this. The container will either be put on a truck and moved to a destination, or it maybe loaded on a train and moved to a destination, or it could do both. It's possible that the destination is the final warehouse for distribution, but it could also be a freight handling location where a full container is unloaded and all of the contents are sent off to different customers, because the whole container is not just one customer's goods. There's a lot of different scenarios here. And any stoppage in that sequence of phases could potentially cause a backup in this whole process that leads to ships sitting in the harbor. And let's think about that for a minute and work through how that happens. So COVID obviously caused a lot of companies to shut down for a long period of time, and people were not going in their shops and warehouses working, so goods were not being shipped out from those distribution points. And this would back it up into the movement of containers from the ports. Like the company says, no, I can't take that container right now. I don't have anywhere to put it. And even if I did, all the stuff on it, I don't have anyone to unload it and handle it anyway. So the flow of containers would slow down, and they would be unloaded in the ports, and the space for that unloading would just quickly fill up. And then you would have ships full of containers that would be sitting out in the harbors waiting to be unloaded, because the orders were already in the flow. The system was already backed up, backloaded there. We would expect that scenario to be happening last year in 2020. So we had, why wasn't the impact then? That was the biggest impact of COVID on us. So why did that not have a continuing impact up that shipping chain? We began opening back up, though, in 2021, and people began going back to work. So now shipping costs most assuredly were impacted by this slowdown. The cost of shipping dropped. It went from an average of it dropped down to about $1,300 a container, and this was down from something like, it was over $19,000 a container back in 2019. But as of earlier this week, October 4th, October 5th, I'm not exactly sure when the number came from, I don't remember, but it was back up to about $10,000 a container. So we were at 19, we go down during COVID to about $1,300, and now we've pushed back up to about $10,000 a container. So clearly 2020 had a major impact on shipping, but it not exactly the way we kind of would expect it. That whole backup didn't happen in 2020. It's happening now. It just kind of doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And the story is that shipping costs were so low that containers were coming over less than half full. So did this lower cost in shipping maybe reduce that backup? So, kind of act like a brake on it? That seems to not make any sense. Everybody was at home ordering crap off of Amazon. So there was still this, big demand out there, and we didn't really have these shortages happening and these backlogs in shipping back in 2020. Other than the toilet paper, the paper backup. But when you look at that, I really think that was something that was panic buying. Are we just seeing a delay of that impact, that effect from 2020 stretching into 2021? That doesn't really make sense to me. The demand stayed high, but the shipping companies reduced their capacity so they would not have the backups, and that demand just gave them enough freight to haul to keep ships moving, even though they were transporting mostly empty containers. But then as the world comes out of lockdown, companies are placing these massive orders to take advantage of that low shipping cost and get as much here as they could, and that caused this massive number of containers to be shipped backing up the ports. And that doesn't really make any sense either. That would imply that China was able to ramp up production back to pre-COVID levels and ship that product out at the pace, and suddenly so much product got to port that it couldn't be unloaded. That might make sense if China actually did that and continued to do that. But China is hitting major slowdowns themselves. We're being told China is going through massive work stoppages, not because of some new wave of COVID, but because they're having these energy shortages. They can only power some of their plants and factories 1 or 2 days a week. How is China suddenly short of electrical power generation capacity? What happened there? Did their coal mines shut down? Did their oil-fired electrical plants shut down? What happened there? Is this just some weird way of China covering for millions of COVID deaths? I don't think that's the case. But it's clear that the impact of this reaches all the way back up the chain, as we got reports this week that ships are now starting to sit in the Chinese harbors, and they're either not being loaded or they're fully loaded and just not sailing because they have nowhere to go. But what about transporting the containers from ports to distribution? Do we have a shortage of rail crews or truck drivers? Are they not working due to COVID restrictions? Did we have a mass reduction in truck or rail capacity? That doesn't make any sense, and no one's really pointing to that as a cause of all this. Everything seems to be pointing back to the ports themselves and the physical unloading of the ships, and that seems to be the choke point and the spot where it's all breaking down. Now, I don't know any longshoremen that can speak to this, and I have yet to see anyone speak to a longshoreman to get their insider take on that situation. But that's something to note here. Let's suppose that what is going on is that COVID rules for California are not allowing workers to unload the ships in Long Beach and Los Angeles harbor fast enough, and that was causing the backup there. Well, that might explain those two ports, but what about Seattle? What about Savannah and Jacksonville? Georgia and Florida have been open for months, and people are back to work mostly normal here. What is keeping Savannah from unloading everything in a normal fashion? Ships coming into Savannah are generally not directly from China. Things going on there should not be impacting East Coast traffic like it is. We're seeing backups in East Coast ports. It doesn't make any sense to me. I understand somebody who makes $10 or $12 an hour not wanting to go back to work while they're collecting benefits from unemployment or the COVID stimulus. But that's not what longshoremen make. They make a good bit more than $10 an hour. I've seen people say, the average longshoreman in California makes close to $100,000. These are generally not the type of people who don't want to work. And if the companies are having trouble filling positions, I can't see that either. There's people, looking to move up who would take a job making $100,000 a year. I don't think that's actually a labor shortage that's happening here. Like I said, it's happening on both coasts. It's just not making any sense to me. So everything seems to be pointing back to either the shipping companies or the government, or some combination thereof. Is the Biden administration doing something maybe in customs that is causing these containers to sit and wait for an inspection or something like that? It's backing everything up. Are there labor rules that were put into place by the administration that keep dock workers from working on this problem? Maybe they're not being allowed to work overtime due to COVID or something. I don't know. I'm asking you guys. I think we can figure this out if we maybe speak to some people and get that information. So I'm kind of reaching out to you guys to maybe crowdsource some info here, and maybe we can kind of get to the bottom of it. Because, like I said, every video, everything that I'm reading, it's fingers going everywhere. Nobody seems to be able to pin this down. Now, I don't put it past the Biden administration to put rules into place that caused this, but no one has identified that. I don't put it past shipping companies from orchestrating some kind of slowdown to raise shipping prices, back up to what they were in 2019. And that may be part of the equation, but the problem there is the dock workers they don't report directly to the shipping companies. They're working for the dock. So, which is kind of an extension, going back up into state governments. Our local and state governments ordering the dock workers to slow down and not unload the ships. That's not really being pointed to either. No one is talking about that. They're all pointing their fingers in other directions. I don't know the answer here, guys, but I'm hoping that we can get to it. Maybe somebody out there knows someone who works on the docks that will speak to them and give them a better inside view of what's going on. Regardless of what the cause is, okay, this has been a long lead up really to the point of what I'm want to get to today. The results are that we're beginning to see more and more shortages hitting our shelves. And your normie friends and family are going to start seeing the light here as this situation increases and gets worse. And they're finally going to see that you were not the tinfoil hat wearing weirdo that they've been talking about at all your Thanksgiving dinners. And you really knew what you were talking about when you told them that this was coming. Now I want you to use this time. I want you to take advantage of it and let them know that they need to be stockpiling now before it's too late. It's getting to the point where they will have no options. Maybe this is when you tell them that they can't come to your place and use what you've stockpiled. And that may be a difficult conversation to have with normies. And this may be something you have to be really careful about. If you do this the wrong way and you make them angry, they'll turn on you. You're more than likely already pushing it because of the jab. But these normies can be your worst enemy. They will resent that you prepared for these times and they didn't. And the commies are already blaming us for being the cause of why we can't go back to so-called normal. And when the shortages get worse, they're going to just ramp that up, and they will accuse us of hoarding and making the situation worse. Even though we know the truth, the normies are going to latch on to that. Some of them will. So keep that in mind as you navigate through this upcoming time. I've come to the point that I believe that our time is very short. We're danger close to things going sideways. So we have to be very, very calculating and very, very careful in the near term of how we use our time and how we use our funds and how we work our interactions and relationships with other people, especially face to face. Spicy times are coming, folks. I mean, we've been talking about this for years, but we're finally coming down to, like I said, the time that I think things are going to happen. So be careful out there. That's all I got time for today. Come see us over on Gab and the Mothership. Like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next episode.